It's a document created by human beings. It will never be perfect. Certainly, all people will never agree that it is what they want.
It was a very significant step in Canadian history.
It's like a contract that for Canadians, it tells us and explicitly what are the common values and principles that we share and that govern our collective space.
A wise old trade unionist once described freedom of speech as the grievance procedure of a democratic society.
It must, however, be recognized that no constitution, no charter of rights and freedoms, no sharing of powers can be a substitute for the willingness to share the risks and grandeur of the Canadian adventure.
During the 20th century, human rights came to the forefront of social and political change throughout the world. In 1982, with the patriation of the Canadian Constitution, Canada gave birth to one of the most celebrated documents in Western civilization, the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. The role of the Charter is to protect and guarantee the fundamental rights of Canadians.
These are the fundamental rights that are required for a democracy to work, a healthy democracy to work. The right of expression, the right to vote, the right to be treated with dignity and respect by fellow citizens and by the government.
Look at what we are today as compared to 1982. Are we different from then as a society? Are we better? Are we worse? And it is in that comparison that we'll see whether or not the Charter works, and does it work for us, or who does it work for, etc.
Some people say that democracy means that the Parliament and the legislature should control everything in our society. Well, I just don't think that's a very rich definition of democracy. And I think our parliamentarians have recognized that when they themselves enacted the Charter.
The Charter is contained within the Canadian Constitution. It is divided into 33 legislative sections and has been translated into over 22 languages. Justice Robert Sharp sits on the Court of Appeals of Ontario. The former Dean of Law at the University of Toronto has written extensively about the Charter of Rights and Freedoms.
They say every individual has the right of freedom of expression, of freedom of religion. So even if you're not yet a Canadian citizen legally, you have the rights of citizenship more broadly. There are only certain rights, mobility rights and language rights, that are directly focused on citizenship. But most rights in the Charter apply to anyone who is caught up in the Canadian legal process. So as soon as you set foot in Canadian soil, you're entitled to the Charter's protection.
It gives a roadmap to the country to say that even if the majority feels that rights should be taken away, they cannot be taken away. And I think that's an important roadmap for a country that's struggling with diversity in all its forms. And I think it's made Canada a place where diversity is truly a hallmark of who we are.
Canada officially became a country in 1867 under the terms of the British North America Act, or BNA Act.
What's interesting about the BNA Act, which was the Constitution of Canada until 1982. It was, in fact, called the Constitution of Canada, but it was in the hands of the British. It was originally brought about in 1867 to help the British to govern this area called Canada.
The BNA Act contained almost no reference to rights, freedoms, or civil liberties of any kind for Canadians. Although Canadians were involved in writing it, the Act could only be appealed in Britain. In the middle of the 20th century, several bills addressing human rights made their way through the Canadian Parliament, but they were not entrenched in the BNA Act and had limited strength.
So it was important to have one single piece of written constitution that applied to everyone in Canada, whether they were citizens or not, in every province of Canada, and so that neither the federal government nor the provincial government to step on anyone's toes or deny them their basic rights and freedoms.
In 1968, Pierre Elliott Trudeau was elected Prime Minister of Canada. Trudeau had grown up in Quebec during a period of political unrest. He was determined to bring home the Canadian Constitution and create a Canada honoring equality and human rights. Reverend Roland de Cornier served as a member of Parliament for most of the 1980s. He led a Canada-wide effort supporting the Charter.
It wasn't just Pierre Trudeau who felt this way, but you could go back to 1927, back all through the various prime ministers of Saint Laurent and of Diefenbaker and of Lester Pearson, all of them having been concerned about some way in which to bring about a guarantee of people's rights.
But it was Trudeau's tenacity that would change the course of Canadian history.